have as a continent. With that, Chair, I invite you to make your remark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fadel, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I think, as usual, all protocols observed. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you to be part of this debate. I think on behalf of the AGRA and the AGRF partners, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this important dialogue ahead of the Food Systems Summit in 2 days. And this discussion comes a week after the AGRF 2021 Summit, which is to reflect on pathways to recovery and resilient food systems in Africa. I saw the AGRF Summit convened by the President of the Republic of Kenya, brought together 6 presidents and 7 former heads of state and government, and also 20 ministers and more than 8,000 passionate believers in the power of resilient food system to drive sustainable development. I think this is a great achievement. We all know that Africa is off track to meet most of the sustainable development goals. So is my country, Ethiopia. And I think these targets related to hunger, food and nutrition security by 2030. We are still off track. It's also important to note that there are just 9 harvests left for us to achieve SDGs. And we are currently not on target. And similarly, Africa is behind on its commitments under the Malabo Declaration, as Fadel said. So I think, in addition to that, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the vulnerability of our food systems to external shocks. And it has eroded some of the gains we have achieved in the years prior. Climate change also poses a significant threat to smallholder farmers and threatens to undermine global progress towards poverty alleviation, food and nutrition security, and sustainable development. So the impact of climate change in smallholder agriculture are likely to intensify in the future years as well. So as climate scientists project rising temperatures, more erratic rainfall and extreme weather events we are seeing now practically. So against these challenges are great opportunities as well. I think we shouldn't lose hope. The consensus from the AGRF Summit was that urgent change is needed if we are to attain the ambitious goal of ending hunger, poverty, and malnutrition by 2030. Of course, we cannot do it by 2025, as Malabo Declaration says. We have to focus on 2030. African leaders reflected on the common African position for the UN Food Systems Summit and see great potential in bringing political vision to action on the ground. I look forward to hearing more on this from the government officials in this debate. We must turn to the serious business of accelerating progress in transforming our food systems to be more sustainable and resilient while preserving our planet. African governments must pursue tailored solutions to change how we produce and process and consume food and manage the waste. Of course, we have to manage properly the waste. Most African countries depend on smallholder farmers to produce enough food for their populations. When smallholder farmers succeed, economies thrive. Supporting smallholder farmers is not an option for government leaders. It is necessity for the transformation of our food systems. So to be very clear, we must redouble our efforts to transform the productivity of our smallholder farmers in an eco-friendly and sustainable manner. We agree there is an urgent need to ramp up efforts to help smallholder farmers cope with existing challenges and adapt to future climatic conditions. Building resilience and facilitating smallholder farmers' adaptation to climate change will require a combination of policy, technical expertise, and research solutions. We must develop adaptation policies and programs targeted at smallholder farmers, create incentives and other financing mechanisms to support our farmers' adaptation efforts, and strengthen extension services as we are doing in AGRA. And we need to supplement and upgrade rain-fed agriculture with water harvesting, sustainable land management, and integrated nutrient management for soil health, apart from the traditional only improved seeds and fertilizer applications. So we need to redouble this effort. Like, also draw out the considerable potential offered by trade. One of the landmark decisions of our leaders is the African Continental Free Trade Area. And I think this has to be taken into consideration. We cannot have it easier to import food from thousands of kilometers away when we have here 50 kilometers away over our national borders. And so I think the evidence is clear. We need to transform our food systems, and we need to do it now, not tomorrow. So with this, I look forward to hearing from you all how we can deliver on African agenda in building resilience food system. Thank you, Fadel, and thank you for the panelists and audiences.
Thank you so much, Chair. Sir, you articulated very powerfully, some very important messages. Firstly, we all know the problem and we agree that Africa will not meet, we are off track on the Sustainable Development Goal and the Malabo Declaration. COVID-19 has shown how vulnerable our food systems are. Climate change is probably one of the biggest threats. But on the other hand, we have political will and commitment that has been expressed at the highest level. We understand the strategic requirement of pursuing targeted solutions to change how we produce, process, consume food while managing waste. We understand the policy imperative of doubling down our effort to transform productivity of smallholder farmers. As you said, when smallholder farmers succeed, economy thrives. You highlighted two great opportunities that we can leverage and build on: the Continental Free Trade Area that was launched last year, and unlocking the potential of youth, women, and agripreneurs. Thank you so much, sir. And we also heard you, we don't have a lot of time. We have to act now and get things done. With that, I just would like, before giving the floor to my brother, William, just quickly build on what you referred to, Chair, as the commitment from AGRF. I think we have a broad-based coalition of stakeholders who met and affirm the commitment of the continent to really build back better, build forward better. We have some very strong leadership from continents, from countries who are willing to catalyze rapid expansion in agriculture and food productivity, paying particular attention on smallholder farmer, women and youth, boosting financing into African Food System Summit, ensuring safe and nutritious food for all, strengthening Africa's local and regional food markets, and finally building resilience, especially through social safety net and early warning system. I think those are the commitments that we have made, and I think we look forward to how we're going to walk the talk. Africa has spoken. How, as partners, are we going to mobilize to make it happen? With that, it's my pleasure to introduce my brother, William Asiko, who is the Regional Director of Rockefeller Foundation, a founding member of the Piata Partnership, to moderate the next session. Thank you, sir, for your contribution. Over to you, William.
Thank you very much, my brother Fadel. And before we let His Excellency go, it would be remiss of me not to offer, on behalf of the Rockefeller Foundation and Mount Man behalf, very strong congratulations on a very successful AGRF that came up with a very strong declaration at the end, a very, very clear roadmap on what we want and what we need here in Africa. I just have one question for you, Your Excellency, that perhaps we can hear from you. One of the things that Fadel said in his framing remarks was that we in Africa need to establish a way to convert political commitments into actions. And this is a time when this is even more critical. What has been your experience, and what can you share with us and the rest of us in this panel on making strong political commitments and then following them up with executive actions that actually produce results?
Thank you very much, William. First of all, I would like to confess this year AGRF has shown us there is a huge commitment from African leaders. I think 10 presidents has agreed to take part in the AGRF summit. And because of the West African problem in Guinea-Conakry, the president of Ghana and the president of Burkina Faso has declined at the last minute because of that catastrophe. Otherwise, this is a very great sign for us to see that heads of state and government commit to the African Green Revolution Forum, beyond that to our food system transformation agenda. And I think the Malabo Declaration and the biennial review also shows that many countries are progressing very well, even though we are behind the target. So I think if we continue with this momentum, and I have had a very good trip to 10 countries in Africa and met in all these countries leaders, and their focus on agriculture has been tremendous. If I tell you, when President Buhari started his second term, I think the first meeting we had there was some half-half with regards to agriculture as a priority. But now I saw a very great commitment that agriculture has become a priority for Nigerian government. So Nigeria, 1 in 5 African is a Nigerian. So if Nigeria has a commitment, it all means that Africa is moving towards achieving that goal. So there is an encouraging momentum that has been developed. We have to continue with that. Of course, we have to work very hard in collaborating with other partners as well, as we are doing in the PIATA partners. Thank you for Rockefeller Foundation for your support, and also USAID and other organizations who are working with us in this journey. And I believe that with this commitment and BMGF as well, and I believe we can achieve this very well in the future. And we are remaining only with 9 years, and if we redouble our efforts, I think there is huge optimism that we can achieve our targets.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We really appreciate those wise words, and we know that they are backed with real experience from yourself when you're leader of Ethiopia. So we will thank you, Your Excellency. I know that you have another meeting to attend. We really appreciate those remarks, and we will let you leave at your pleasure. But as we go forward, we will move into the second sequence of this panel discussion. And really, I want to take it over from just where His Excellency left off, because turning a resilient food system vision that we have for Africa, which was really underlined at AGRF, into a reality is going to be the big challenge. This is going to be the challenge of our time if we're to meet the goals. And so I'd like to introduce some speakers. And before I do that, I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions on what you have heard so far and what you're going to hear, please use the chat function in Zoom. It has a Q&A button. If you click on that chat, you can put your questions there, and we will definitely come to them and put them to the panel. So our next sequence is looking at partnership and investment needed to achieve this resilient food systems here in Africa. And I'm trying here to get the speakers to draw up some of the following pieces. So looking at Africa, what is our context and how do we build a resilient food system to enable sustainable development and end hunger? Okay, big topic. And then development partners. How should we as development partners use our development assistance to attract investment, for technical cooperation, to support policy building? We really need to coordinate this as development partners to make this happen. And then, of course, the big elephant in the room is always the private sector. How do we engage the private sector in a meaningful way to ensure that they are able to invest in food systems that are commercially viable for them and sustainable, but also protect the environment? So with that, I will go to our next series of speakers, and I will start with His Excellency Ken Ofori-Atta, Minister for Finance and Economic Planning, Republic of Ghana, to make his remarks. Excellency Minister, are you with us? Okay, it looks like we don't have His Excellency online yet, but I know that we do have Dr. Jim Barnhart, Assistant Administrator, Bureau of Food Resilience and Food Security at USAID. Jim, so, we've talked here about how we as development partners need to think a little bit out of the box in how we use our development assistance. USAID has been a strong supporter of agriculture and food system for decades, and you are currently refreshing your global food security strategy. What do you think needs to change in order to bolster productivity and resilience by smallholder farmers to end hunger in Africa?
Well, thank you, William, and thank you to AGRA for organizing this incredibly important discussion at this pivotal moment in time where we have the world's attention on this incredibly important topic of food systems. The build-up to this Thursday has been impressive, and all credit to groups like AGRA who have helped in building us up to the summit on Thursday. First, before I answer your question, I have to make note that an hour or so ago, President Biden, in his General Assembly speech, highlighted the importance of a U.S. government commitment to food systems and announced the $10 billion that the U.S. is going to commit over in the next few years to address food systems to end poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. That will be split roughly 50-50 between work that we need to do within our own country, but then another 50% of the 10 billion will be work that we'll be doing with our partners around the world. So I think the fact that the President of the United States used his General Assembly moment to highlight food systems is indicative of the importance that the United States is placing on trying to address these issues that we're talking about today, Williams. And it's a very exciting moment for me, and I'm really pleased to be on the panel with you. So I think the conversation today underscores the importance of an African-led agenda, and that we have to have an African-led agenda to achieve true food system transformation. From experience, we understand that locally led food systems is shaped by Africans will be the most productive and resilient in the long run. Further, food systems must be inclusive and accountable to all of the population. We need to bring everyone to the table to talk about how we address issues of nutrition, hunger, and poverty. And we need to give marginalized populations agency and leadership in helping to guide us as development partners. In response to specifically to your question, we believe that Africa's common position to the UN Food Systems Summit has already identified the areas that need to change. And to highlight a few of those. First, we do support strongly Africa's commitment to strengthening the business enabling environment through policy and regulatory reform. These reforms can stimulate private sector investment and level the playing field for smallholder farmers. And I think at this point, it's also important that we emphasize the element of transparency of policy, so that it is clear for the smallholder farmer and the multinational corporation that would like to invest in food systems, the rules of the road to work in a particular country. The more transparent and open the system, the more engaged and vibrant the private sector. So that's a critical principle. Second, we support an improved digital ecosystem that expands access to data and digital tools for smallholder farmers. This includes the African Union's continent-wide effort under CAADP to strengthen data systems across its 55 member states. And we support these and other efforts to make agriculture data widely available and to help businesses, particularly SMEs, make informed decisions. The digital revolution has been some of the most democratizing effects in terms of trying to get information and pass more decision-making authority to smallholder farmers across the continent. Third, to promote nutrition and access to healthy diets, we agree the need to scale up research-driven food science technologies. For example, we look forward to continued dialogue with our African partners around large-scale food fortification to help people access the proper vitamins and minerals in their diets. Fourth, agriculture transformation can be a major contributor to improved food security, poverty reduction, and enhanced access to safe and nutritious food on the continent. When I talk outside, it always surprises people when I explain to them that the agriculture sector employs over 65% of Africa's labor force, while supporting the livelihoods of 90% of the population. And our evidence strongly supports that investments in agriculture are up to 4 times more effective at reducing poverty than investments in growth in other sectors. And so some of the fastest growth that's now occurring in Africa is in these systems. And so we need to continue and accelerate that momentum. So lastly, and I know I'm taking up too much time, William, but we need to respond to the increased shocks, such as droughts and floods. And we need to do it in a coordinated and collaborative fashion to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And this is going to require increased political will to promote investments in climate financing, drought, flood-resistant plant varieties, and improve natural resource management. I should pause here because I know there are others on the panel, and I don't want to take the whole time. So let me take it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. And I think those are extremely useful remarks from such an important partner to not just AGRA, AGRF, but to very many African governments on the continent. So, clearly articulating that the African Common Position to the Food System Summit has already identified quite a lot of things that we need to do here in Africa, but more importantly, what they want to see from our development partners. So that's going to be very important. Data and digital revolution. I mean, we cannot underscore how important this is, and especially for our SMEs and smallholder farmers to have information that they can make decisions on, on a real-term basis. And then research, and particularly around nutrition, and then these competing interests around food systems. The idea that you're trying to have food security, but at the same time, you're trying to protect the environment. You're trying to do increased nutrition, but at the same time, you're trying to do increased productivity. So there's a lot of trade-offs you have to have in order to do this. And I like the way you articulated each of those positions.
Can I say one other aspect of this, William?
Sure, Jim, go ahead.
It's going to differ by country, by region within countries, right? And so that's let's go back to the beginning. This needs to be a locally led program that allows that allows African, private sector, civil society, political leadership at the local level to guide the international community to invest in the best ways to address their particular issues. And if we don't do that, if we continue to try to think about a top-down approach from headquarters, I think we will continue to not be as effective as we could be otherwise. So again, locally led leadership that obviously incorporates leadership among the most marginalized folks in across all of our partners. That's certainly what we'll be looking to be doing. So I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Excellent. No, not a problem. A very important point, of course, that, as we constantly talk about Africa, we have to remember that there are both national and regional differences, and that no, it cannot be a one-size-fits-all. There'll be different for different countries. So a very, very important point. I think that brings us very nicely to our next speaker, Ms. Evangelista Shakira. Now, you are an entrepreneur. Having heard from government, from His Excellency Haile Mariam Desalegn, and then hearing now from a very important development partner for Africa, what are you hearing? What are you hearing and what are you not hearing? And what would you like to hear?
Okay, thank you very much, William, for that. And thank you to AGRA for this opportunity. So I come from Passion Poultry, which is a startup based in Zimbabwe. And as a young entrepreneur, I believe that there are three most important things that the government as well as investors should put into the table for us to build sustainable and resilient food systems. And I believe that this should be aligned with the 3 E's, that is education, experience, as well as exposure. From a personal perspective, I believe that a lot of young entrepreneurs in the agribusiness would agree with me on this one, is that we need more grants for us to do proper research and development in terms of the products and services we are coming up with. If you notice that most of us as young people, we start developing solutions to our problems while still we are in school. And you realize that we actually do not have funds to do a lot of research and development in terms of product development as well as service development. Because of that, we either pull down on the innovations or we come up with half-baked products, which will not really work well in the industry. But if we have access to more grants at local level, that will be helpful. And then to add on to that, there's also a need for the government, especially to create local hubs whereby young innovators can actually go there and make their products as well as their solutions. Coming from a personal background, I had the idea of the innovations that I'm currently working on when I was 10, but I had no place or anyone to assist me in order to develop that. So if we can have these hubs, for example, in local institutions, for example, government schools, that would be helpful, whereby local young people can actually go there and work on their innovations. Because I've realized that African youth actually know their challenges, and we are trying to come up with these solutions, but we need help in terms of having sites where we can go and work on these solutions so that we reduce the time that we need to come up with these products as well as services. And then another issue is that, yes, we have realized the problems, food problems we have in Africa, and we have so many solutions, and we have come up with so many innovations in order to tackle these problems. And the other challenge is that we lack the exposure, as I have mentioned. Hence, we are not able to fully build the business case through these innovations that we have. So we'll need the government as well as the investors not only to give us money to scale up our innovation, but we also need mentorship so that we can build proper business cases from these innovations, and also help in the food systems. Another thing that I've realized, and together with my colleagues, is that when the government and investors come up with ideas to help us, they actually do not include us. And they think they know what we need, but they actually don't know. So we'd like them to invite us so that we can tackle these solutions together and bring the proper policies that can actually help young innovators build resilient food system in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evangelista. I think those are very refreshing remarks. I mean, you know, many of us will have attended sessions of this nature when we hear from entrepreneurs, especially young ones, talk about a lack of access to finance and a lot of the real challenges that many entrepreneurs face. But I think this idea of education, experience, and exposure, you know, is really something that not a lot of people are talking about as being critical to establishing a successful and sustainable food system. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, countries that have done well on incubators for innovation, not just in food, but in other things, have seen real strides in getting those innovations brought to the market and applied to the real world. And so I really like those ideas. And I know that, you know, this idea of inclusion, you know, actually having these discussions with the entrepreneurs, young people themselves, to hear their voice when making policies is also another very important point you have raised. We'll take up some of those discussions, some of those issues you've raised a little bit later with some of our speakers. I'd like to move on now to Dr. Nyemaima Njuki, who is the Director for Africa for IFPRI. Now, we've heard from the private sector, we've heard from development partners, we've heard from government. All these things are brought together, all these, I guess, arms of different actors are brought together by strong policies that are aligned with what the government wants to achieve. What do you see as the most important features of policy that we need to see for our farmers to build these resilient and sustainable food systems? Over to you, Jemima.
Thank you very much, William, and thanks, Agra, for organizing this and having me. I think one of the things I would like to start with, William, is to say really our food systems are hinged on smallholder farmers, that actually without them at the center, we really don't have functional food systems. And so the first thing that I would say about policies and how we need to design them is they must have a very smallholder-centric view. And whether we are talking about innovations that these policy mechanisms must anchor, these must be innovations that actually reach and that work for smallholder farming. So we must bring these innovations that build resilience in food systems to farmers, whether these are climate insurance, whether it's climate smart agriculture. They must be delivered in ways that work. But the other thing is they can't also just be single solutions. I think Jim said this very well, that they must be accompanied by other policies and services, including extension services and making sure that markets actually work for smallholders. One of the things we have seen from research, for example, from the Ceres report that came out a couple of years ago, is that smallholder farmers are actually much more likely to adopt newer approaches, whether this is planting climate resilient crops, whether it's taking up insurance, if they're supported by other services. These services, whether it's technical advice, inputs, and and they increase their incomes if they also belong to cooperatives, self-help groups, and other organizations, including SMEs that they can sell to either formally or informally. So what I'm trying to say is that we must have a very holistic policy environment that actually is conducive for making all these work. The second thing that I want to say about this is, we have romanticized smallholder producers for a long time, and we need policies that actually that ensure that our smallholder producers live dignified lives. Every time the state of food insecurity comes out, we see that the hungriest people are actually in rural areas. The hungriest people are our food producers. And this is just, I find it really unacceptable that we allow this to happen. And I myself am a daughter of a smallholder farmer. So these are also experiences that a lot of us have had firsthand. So we really must accompany innovations with improving efficiency of smallholder production, whether it's making sure mechanization services are available, using digital tools, but making sure that markets work for them and farmers can make a decent living. And a lot of this has a policy angle to it. And the third and final thing I would like to say is we must also plan for scale. And this is where the role of government in terms of providing a conducive environment, but also in terms of prioritizing investment options, the private sector, other funding agencies can actually build on. We have too many pilots of things all over the continent. Whether it's livestock-based insurance that was developed for Kenya and Somalia, that would be so useful for Sahel, but hasn't got to the livestock keepers in Sahel. How do we really work as a continent to make sure that the solutions that work in one country can actually be used in other countries and can be taken to scale? And this is where I think the role of CADEP, the role of Africa Union in terms of making sure that that policy environment is conducive across the continent is so critical. I'll stop there, William.
Thank you very much, Jemima. Again, you've touched on some absolutely critical points there about having a holistic policy environment. And again, many of us will have seen situations where, policies are designed within one department or one ministry without trying to understand how the impact would be or which other policies need to be addressed in order to have the effect that we're looking on for the food system. Food systems are multifaceted. They range across government departments, ministries, private sector, development partners, and you really do need to take a multifaceted approach. So I really like the intervention there. And then romanticizing smallholder farmers. I think this is something we all do. I mean, first of all, smallholder farmers, you are right. I mean, we have this idea that, smallholder farmers just need support, they need credit, and they need but the truth of the matter is we've got to fix a lot of other things for smallholder farmers to be successful. Access to markets. We've done quite well on increasing productivity, but market systems remain weak, and this is something that needs to be looked at. So strong points there from our three panelists. Let me now turn it over to the audience to ask some questions, and I've got some questions in the chat here. So Robin Anderson asks, how will the common position be advanced at the UN Food Systems Summit? And I presume here Robin is talking about the common African position. Can Africa show unique leadership? Now, I'm not sure who can take this, but perhaps I'll ask my brother, Dr. Fadel and Diame, to just speak briefly to the African common position and how we see this translating at the Food System Summit. Are you there, Fadel?
Yes, I'm here, my brother, but I also know that brother Godfrey there and has the perfect mandate of articulating the significance of this one common position. I think what I can say from an AGRA point of view is, to the point that Jim and others were making, you need significant African leadership that also is cognizant of the diversity of situation, therefore the imperative for inclusivity. I think the other thing I really want to say is the common position is actually anchored on existing framework, and where there is a recognition that there are some shortcomings that can be redressed. So we are really looking forward, and I wouldn't want to preempt on what Godfrey is going to articulate later, but that leadership is crucial, because unless Africa show the way, it's very difficult for local actors and partners to rally around. I mean, I think one of the premise of our Piata partnership was that the problem was not always lack of resources, but lack of leadership and order. This is why we celebrate so much the common position of the African Union.
Thank you, Fidel. You've done very well, and indeed, I was keeping the thunder for Godfrey at the end. Godfrey, I know that we are going to come to you to talk in much detail about this African common position. So please just hold your fire for now, if you don't mind, so that we can make sure we get the full depth of what you were saying. So let's move on to the next question. How can we reclaim? So Joyce Ntwawira says, how can we reclaim the indigenous small crops which are very nutritious but are diminishing, like lima beans, green grams, sesame, sorghum? So I guess what Joyce is talking about are some of these forgotten grains that we know are highly nutritious, but they have been left to the side because some of the grains that we are producing today are much more economically viable, and of course the taste profile has people have gotten used to that profile. I don't know, Jemima, do you want to take a stab at this?
Yes, happy to, William. I think there's two elements to this. One, we also know that these crops sometimes, and not just lima beans, crops like small millets, sorghums, that have been a very key component of our traditional African food systems, and that are not always grown by smallholder farmers now. And we need to bring some of these back. So there's some technological issues around it in terms of how do we build the seed systems for these crops so that seed is available to those that need to plant them. But there's also a policy dimension to it, because very often governments prioritize what their key crops are. And we know what that has led to. It has led to maize, wheat, rice being some of the most heavily consumed crops in the continent. And a lot of it is because the objective of the policy dimension is crops that can be exported, crops that are heavily consumed in a country. And what we are trying to do, even as if with our work on policies, is to really look at the multiple objectives that our food systems need to address. And this will include nutrition. And if we bring issues of nutrition, if we bring issues of climate resilience to be part of the objectives of food systems policy making, what we then end up with is a much more diverse basket of crops and livestock products that then a country can build their policy, their seed systems, their distribution systems around. So there is a policy angle as well there that needs to happen, and that is already starting to happen. We've seen millets, for example, in Kenya really come back in a big way in terms of nutrition. We've seen crops like sweet potatoes and the biofortified versions of it, researchers coming together to develop the seed systems and to ensure that the trade of these crops is also happening. So it's gonna have to be a very intentional process. I don't think they're just going, they've been years of neglect of some of these crops, and I don't think they're just gonna come back miraculously without a lot of efforts, both from the policy and from the research side, but also from the farmers side as well.
Agreed. Thank you very much, Jemima. Just move on to the next question quickly. I'm watching the time. What does reform of agriculture and food systems do for poverty reduction? Jim, I'm going to turn to you on this one because you spoke quite passionately about this and gave some factual statistics about the numbers of people who rely on agriculture, and made a very emphatic statement that investing in agriculture is the most efficient way to tackle poverty reduction. So how would you answer this question? What does reform of agriculture and food systems actually do for poverty reduction?
So reform of food, of the policy environment, investment in agriculture and in research and in finance systems that support smallholder farmers will be the single most important way to address poverty and inequality, both in Africa and around the world. I mean, as I said, our studies have shown it is 4 times more powerful growth in the agriculture sector and investment in the agriculture sector in addressing poverty and inequality. And that's really critical to just keep in the front of your mind, particularly as you engage with folks who are looking very rightly at other sectors to invest in. So I think that's a priority. William, can I pivot real quickly and just talk quickly to Evangelista and Jemima mentioned something I thought was really important, and I want to get back to it. And it's this idea of international private sector, international donors, international NGOs coming with ideas and solutions for the problems of this, right? And I think what we need to be doing as donors, and certainly I commit us to doing this from USAID, is to stop coming to these to any moment with the solution, and be very, very deliberate in how we listen to our partners. We give agency and leadership to our partners. And if we do that, then I think things like that Joyce has talked about, these traditional grains, if we listen to them, we're able to then figure out ways to apply technical support, financing, et cetera, to elevate it. And if we listen to people like Evangelista on issues of mentorship, on hubs for innovation, there are ways that we can support that, right? But we have to be ready to listen and spend the time that it takes to create a true partnership amongst all the players that are involved in this sector. And I think all of us on Friday after the summit have to commit to double down on that key principle.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm really glad that you made that intervention, Jim, because one of the things I was going to ask was if any of the other panelists have questions for each other that they would like to ask. Does any of the panelists have any questions for any other panelists before we move on to the next sequence? Go ahead, Jemima.
No questions, William.
Okay.
Just listening keenly.
Fantastic. Evangelista, do you have any questions of any of your other panelists?
No questions from me, William. Just that as young people, we would like for you guys to work with us when it comes to coming up with these policies, because we actually know what's really happening on the ground more than you think we know. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Evangelista.
So William, can I make one more intervention? I'm sorry.
Sure. Go ahead.
But again, back to Evangelista. So I've spent most of my 35 years overseas working in various parts of the world on programs. And one of the things that I constantly want to impart with my partners and hosts in whatever country I'm working in is to feel free to tell us when we're wrong. Feel free to tell us, to guide us, right? Too often people are too polite in these kinds of conversations. And if I'm a donor and I walk in and I say, hey, I've got $50 million and I want to invest in maize, they go, great, why not? Rather than saying, wait a second, we've got plenty of money right now in maize. Can you think a little bit about investing in hubs that could help smallholders, right? Yeah. So it truly, I would encourage everyone on this call, when you're engaging with international partners, whoever we are, be true, come into those meetings as partners and really push us, make us think, make us listen, and make us give true ownership and leadership to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. And I think you have dealt with a lot of other questions that are popping up in the chat as well with those interventions. So at this stage, I want to thank our 3 panelists who dealt with this particular issue very effectively. I encourage you to stay on to listen to the next sequence so that we can have a holistic discussion, and we'll have another set of questions between panelists, as well as questions between from the audience as well. So I would encourage you to stay on and continue to listen to your colleagues as they go forward with the next round. So I think here we are going to have 3 panelists who will talk to us in further depth about some of the issues that we've heard. I'm going to turn immediately to you, Roger Voorhees. Roger, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is one of the most recognized brands when it comes to development partners, and certainly in Africa, but around the world as well. And the BMGF has made global commitments on climate change and poverty alleviation. How do you think you can work with governments to close the investment gaps in food systems while still focusing on these very important issues? Over to you, Roger.
Thanks, William. And it's really great to be here. And I think the AGRF Forum set an important message for the Food Systems Summit. And it's great to see it kick off, especially with Evangelista and Jemima's comments on how we're thinking about young people, how we think about the private and the public sector together. And so, William, to answer your question, I think the African presidents and others attending the forum called for greater support for small-scale food producers, with an emphasis on financing, on markets, on early warning systems, and access to affordable but healthy diets. These are all priorities we endorse at the Gates Foundation, and it's going to be critical to accomplishing the summit objectives. Right. In the first half of the 21st century, nearly half of all the population growth in the world will come from Africa, and the majority of that in sub-Saharan Africa. And this presents a real challenge, right, to adequate food supply. How do we do this in a diversified way that's sustainable, nutritious, but to the question that was in the chat, actually drives people out of poverty? And we all know that small-scale producers are the foundation of Africa's food system. So it makes sense that an inclusive agriculture transformation led by smallholders should be the central element of the broader food system transformation. I think we're pretty optimistic at the foundation that the Food Systems Summit will deliver and drive greater support for African farmers, and that we could include new financial commitments to help address their needs. For Africa, securing support for adaptation, climate adaptation, will be especially critical in achieving these goals of the summit. The ability of African farmers to lead a food system transformation is heavily dependent on their ability to adapt to climate change. And this means the fate of the summit agenda is clearly tied to the fate of the adaptation agenda. That's why the upcoming UN Climate Summit in Glasgow is a big moment for African leaders and for their farmers, for the food system, and the ability to recover from the pandemic. Specifically, we need to have a much better balance between funding for adaptation and mitigation. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not about taking funding for mitigation, but more about increasing the support for adaptation. We agree with Secretary General Gutierrez that climate finance should be split 50-50, with a greater focus on supporting adaptation for vulnerable populations. And few groups are more vulnerable to climate change than African farmers. The food system is a critical moment for focusing attention on food challenges facing the world and the people who must lead that transformation. In Africa, the focus must be on smallholder producers, and what happens in Glasgow next month to support their efforts to adapt to climate change may be just as important what happens this week in New York. And that's how this development, to your question, how do we use ODA, investment, lending, and technical cooperation to support these African priorities? The most immediate priority at the moment is to support African governments and African farmers in their efforts to ensure food systems are able to cope with the surge of climate stress. African leaders have made it clear that adaptation will be crucial to their economic growth, and that's why they have endorsed a pandemic recovery strategy focused on mobilizing $25 billion over the next 5 years to support adaptation, including greater support for smallholder farmers. The evidence is clear. Climate change, caused largely by emissions produced elsewhere in the world, are having a big impact on agriculture in Africa. And it's the sector that employs the majority of Africans. A study earlier this year found that at least in the last 60 years, climate change has been a steadily eroding farm productivity around the world. And farmers globally have seen their output decline by as much as 20%. But in many parts of Africa, output has gone down as much as twice. And if we're going to address that to the people who cause none of this, we're going to have to put into it the right technical assistance, the right kinds of sustainability in extension and in social services, but more importantly, in the right kinds of investment and innovation. And so the last point I'd make is that we believe the leaders next month in Glasgow should seize on the opportunity to support African economic recovery, long-term resilience for smallholder farmers, and specifically are seeking new investments in the CGIAR, where the new report showed that every dollar invested in the CGIAR is returning $10 of economic output and productivity around the world. And I just think that smallholder farmers are at the center of it, Williams. I think that we could actually create a transformation for this in a way that preserves natural systems, improves diversity, and actually puts smallholder farmers in Africa at the center of this development. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. Some very, very strong commitments coming out of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I think, Jay, maybe Jay, you need to mute. Thank you. So very strong commitments there. And, you know, I heard over and over again, adaptation. And I think this is a key word and a key moment for African farmers. Now, the challenge, of course, Roger, is going to be that a lot of this has to be driven by government. I think we as development partners can do our bit. You know, we can have our strategies, we can have our resources, but a lot of this is going to fall to the hands of national governments to implement and get forward. How do you think we can work together to encourage governments to go in this direction in a way that is sustainable but also effective?
It's a great question, William. And I think it's both governments, but there's also a need for greater private sector involvement in Africa, whether that's the kinds of things that Evangelista talked about that she's doing, or even in terms of how the Food System Summit can drive the right kinds of infrastructure. So I'll say two things. One is, look, we have a really strong set of commitments on the Malabo Declaration. I've pushed and I agree with what's our accountability framework of who's meeting those commitments. Yeah. You know, there's a commitment around how much we invest in smallholder farmer agriculture. There's a commitment on innovation and research design. And I think we as donors need to walk alongside those commitments that African leaders are making and help them drive that in their countries. I think the second thing is the point of it's not government alone, but it's actually the incredible entrepreneurial spirit that exists in Africa. And I have never been more helpful about the capacity of Africans to actually be transformative and build the kind of society they want. But we're going to have to invest in the right kinds of road, the right kinds of trade agreements, and the right kinds of infrastructure that actually support smallholders. And someone asked in the chat earlier, William, you know, how does this all help the economics of people coming out of poverty? The number one driver of globally of the great progress we've made of people coming out of poverty has been driven by smallholder farmers. And it's time to see a third wave of poverty reduction. We saw a wave of poverty reduction in China. We've seen a wave of poverty reduction in India and South Asia. I'm excited about the third wave of poverty reduction, which is going to happen in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's going to be led by Africans with African innovation.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Roger. Those remarks, I'm sure, resonate with a lot of us. They certainly resonate with me. Thank you. Jay Shroff, so you've been hearing a lot. You are well known in these circles as an investor. You have millions of dollars invested, private sector commercial investments in Africa. How do you work with governments, and what is the role of public-private partnerships, do you think, in building resilient food systems? Over to you, Jay.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to talk to all of you, and absolutely excellent discussion today. Being from the private sector is really focused on arbitrage, right? And there is a great arbitrage in Africa. First of all, with a little bit of technology, a little bit of support, the farmers can make a big impact on yields. With an impact in yields, they can become profitable because a lot of them are self-employed. So the opportunity is there. We see it across. We've worked with potato farmers in Kenya. We're working very actively with rice farmers. We're working with sunflower growers and giving them small bits of technology, whether it's technology that can reduce the impact of climate change. And we see a lot of aspiration in the farmers to get out of poverty. It is not for the lack of trying. I think it is. They are as hungry to get out of poverty as anybody else in the world, and so I feel a great hope that with a little bit of intervention, you can see huge impact. And when you look at some of the value chains which are successful in Africa, if you look traditionally, cotton value chain in West Africa, or some of the tea or flowers, or some of the other value chains in different parts of Africa, they are successful because they have a linkage, they have an offtake, they have commitments, and then you see farmers investing. Look at the sugarcane industry. There's a sugar mill, the catchment area, they're producing, they're making money, their livelihood is improving. So I think it's very important to look at the successful examples. Governments need to look at the successful examples, and we need to go beyond the threshold. I look at countries like Vietnam, which have so successful in their agriculture policy, but there is a lot of support from the government to break the inertia in a new crop. So they've transformed from, in the cashew industry, coffee industry. If you look at Vietnam as an example, fantastic example, focus from the government. But in agriculture, nothing happens in a year. You need consistency. I say this very often, farmers in a 5-year period will definitely have a drought, definitely have a flood. He'll probably go through a period where nobody's there to buy his crop because everybody's had a good yield, or something happened that he could not sell his crop. Plus he'll have a disease, pest attack. And these things can happen more than once in 5 years. To break through that cycle of the negative impacts of all these things, and now with the impact of climate change, it's huge. So the commitment from the government has to be much beyond the election cycle. And it does. I think most governments are interested in, but I really feel that, I've seen some of the experiments they've done in Nigeria. I think it's very, very aggressive, positive to ban imports, to really support local industries, incentivize them, use the government infrastructure to digitize. I think a lot more needs to be done by the government. And as a private sector, we see Africa as a huge opportunity. As Roger said, or as Tim said, the growth is going to come in Africa. They import food, so there is a clear arbitrage. A lot of rice import. They can definitely produce rice, save a lot of money, and that money goes to the smallholder farmers instead of the large trading companies who are importing all this rice. So I think clearly defined policies on clear crops. The strategy you need for cotton is different from rice. The cotton is an export crop. Rice is an import crop. And we need to be clearly defined, work with the small farmers, but also work with the private sector and government and define a 10-year strategy to get that crop out of the inertia. Because you're competing with Brazil, you're competing with Argentina, you're competing with Thailand on these are large organized countries, and to be able to get cost effective in production, which is very important, you need a long-term commitment.
Thank you, Jay. Very, very important comments. I think One question I would like to ask you, though, is, you're a large investor in Africa. You talked about the commitment of governments in a country like Vietnam in supporting smallholder farmers to transform, leading the way on new crops and so on and so forth. Here in Africa, we talk a lot about public-private partnerships. And I'm talking here specifically about where private sector and government invest together in a commercial activity around food systems. We haven't had many successful examples of public-private partnerships. What do you think ails public-private partnerships from a private sector side?
I think in general, I find that most leadership in governments, presidents, prime ministers of countries are very committed to do something in agriculture. I think there is so many priorities they have that we get lost, and by the time the message goes down, it is lost. I mean, if you look at Nigeria, they banned import of rice. Now, it's not a clear ban. There is some smuggling going on, or things make their way through the thing. But it gives so much confidence to the local farmers that no, if we produce, we can do it. I think policy on investment in processing, right? I think the farmers can produce if you get capital in, and if you participate in processing capacities for, say, for example, for rice, for some of the other crops, which billions of dollars Africa is spending on import of. And if those billions of dollars can be shared with the smallholder farmer, I think this is a no-brainer, right? It is easy. I don't think, countries like China were able to succeed in becoming the factory of the world without clearly defined policies and investments in ports and infrastructure, etc. And so I think if the governments invest, understand the philosophy, understand the crops they want to win in, start training the farmers with the private sector, get technologies, better quality technology, but build the infrastructure and support investment in processing. It's an easy win. I really find it very difficult to explain why Africa is not more successful. The farmers are hardworking. There is a need for food. It's not like there's excess food there. So there's no reason why we shouldn't succeed. And I think we need to go drill down into value chains and then identify the real bottlenecks for that, for each value chain. It can be processing for one company, one crop. It could be infrastructure, air freight available for export. You know how many containers of flowers get exported every day out of, how many plane loads of flowers get exported from Kenya every day, Ethiopia every day. So there are some very successful examples of agriculture value chains. And I think we need to look at the successes and say, this Nigeria needs to win, this Tanzania needs to win, and they need to focus. You can't have a general policy across everything to really win, because each value chain needs slightly different kind of facilitation from the government.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jay. And I have to say, as an African, speaking as an African, I'm very proud of the work that you're doing on the continent, and particularly on your focus with smallholder farmers. It's making a huge difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we'll come to our final speaker or panelist today, and my brother Godfrey. You are put in this position because it was important that in your interventions you take into account everything that you have heard before. And there has been a lot said today, but some very important comments and commitments. But I'd like you to deal with three things in your remarks, if I may, Godfrey. First of all, of course, there was that question around the African Common Position. How was it developed? And more importantly, how is it going to be delivered? Okay, so that's one. Then we've heard here about political commitments that have been made by political leaders. Our own heads of state have made commitments in Maputo and in Malabo that came up with CADAP. And the progress on meeting those commitments remains mixed. And then, of course, you have heard about the private sector, and again, CADAP has got clear commitments about private sector investment supporting government investment. So these three things are really at the crux of how we are going to build a sustainable and resilient food system in Africa. And I'm not saying this all falls on the shoulders of the African Union, but the African Union is a very important arbiter in all of these, bringing all these stakeholders together and working and making sure that countries are aligned, private sector is investing, and so on. So if you could just, sort of deal with some of these points, and then we can have a bit of a discussion after that. Over to you, Godfrey.
Thank you so much, William, and good to see you after a while. Yes, so yes, I've taken note of your questions. I hope my prepared statement will, I think, touch on several of these. But if I miss something, you can remind me, and I'll be able to respond. So I'm making this intervention on behalf of Her Excellency Ambassador Joseph Asako, the Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy, and Sustainable Environment of the AU Commission. She would have liked to be here to make the remarks, but she's actually on the plane as we speak to go to New York to be there for the summit on Thursday. So we appreciate the invitation by AGRA to make these remarks at today's side event. As you know, Africa's 2019 CAADP Annual Review Report and recent statistics from other organizations indicate that Africa, and as Prime Minister Haile Mariam indicated, and Jim Bernhardt from USAID also talked about, that Africa is not on track to meet its CAADP commitment goals and targets by 2025. And that by implication, not on track to meet the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. So this UN Food System Summit has focused our thinking on what we need to do to change in Africa's food systems. It is an opportunity for Africa to transform its food systems, which have been, whose vulnerability has been revealed, especially by the COVID-19 pandemic, and remains vulnerable to climate change, transboundary pests and diseases that have reversed all the gains that Africa has made in the last decade. So, working with the AU Development Agency, NEPAD, and the UN Economic Commission for Africa, the AU Commission led the formulation of an Africa Common Position to this Food System Summit. This position was endorsed by AU member states on July 15th and was presented at the pre-summit by President Paul Kagame, who is the chair of the NEPAD Heads of State and Orientation Committee, and will be presented by President Felix Tshisekedi of DRC, who is the current chair of the African Union at the summit on Thursday. It was developed through a highly consultative process involving governments, academia, private sector, the youth, and many other groups. So it is wholly owned on the African continent. President Tshisekedi will give a lot of details in his speech on Thursday, but permit me to say a few things, highlight a few things that may be in his speech. One is the continent's desire to meet its future food needs through doubling production on a sustainable basis, through adopting technologies that lead to high yields for crops and animals, through supporting agricultural research to develop climate-smart technologies while embracing the benefits of biotechnology. Second, as Mr. J mentioned, Africa desires to rely less on food importation and produce food on this continent to feed itself, but at the same time, save resources and create jobs or keep jobs on the continent. But we want to increase food production while protecting the environment for current and future generations. Three, as you have heard from previous speakers, climate change is real and impacting negatively Africa's food systems. And so we are calling on the world through this UN Food System Summit to commit to the implementation of the Paris Agreement and through their implementing their national determined contributions, and also reminding the rich countries who pollute more than Africa on their commitment they made to raise resources to support poorer countries. So we hope that the COP26 in Glasgow will advance this discussion. Number 4, through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, under which trading commenced on January 31, Africa is open for business for both domestic and foreign investors. And we want to invest in infrastructure and capacity building of our member states to improve food safety standards and compliance, to protect consumers, but also to be a basis for boosting intra-Africa trade. And the final point, final highlight I want to talk about in the common position is the issue of the fiscal constraints that our member states are facing because of COVID-19. And as such, our heads of state and government are calling for the establishment of a fund for food security and nutrition managed by the Africa Development Bank. That said, we will not have achieved much after the summit if we let the common position sit on the shelf. So as such, as African Union Commission, together with NEPAD, once the summit is over, we want to support our member states to domesticate the outcomes of the summit in national implementation plans across the various sectors. In fact, we have already begun this last week when we organized a meeting of 47 national conveners to lay out a concrete plan for implementation. We also encourage our member states to join different partnerships and coalitions that are emerging out of this summit to advance particular interests in the common position, but also advancing their own national interests. Finally, we also are calling for developing a mechanism for accountability to track and monitor the progress in implementation of the outcomes of the summit. We in Africa already have a monitoring and reporting mechanism under the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, CAADP, where we report to our heads of state every 2 years. We are committed to reviewing this framework in the interest or under the mandate of the UN Food System Summit to incorporate those indicators that may be relevant and necessary to track the progress in implementing these commitments in the Food System Summit. In fact, the 2021 CAADP annual review report will have a section where we review the data within the context of the Food System Summit, and this will mark the baseline for tracking the actions or commitments in the UN Food System Summit. So that ends my remarks, but if you allow me, William, I wanted to respond to 3 comments that were made in the comment section. The first one was by Joyce from Malawi on neglected crops. I want to assure her that within the Africa Common Position, and especially under Action Tracker number 2, we have a commitment to promote and support the production and consumption of traditional and indigenous foods. So let her be assured that it is something that we have taken care of. The second reaction is to Maurice Kabuye, who was asking about Africa having an uninterrupted agenda. That agenda, Maurice, is the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program that was adopted by our heads of state and government in 2003 in Maputo, and we have remained consistent with that framework. The challenge is to ensure that we implement that framework. Finally, Jim Bernhardt talked about the reform of policies for food systems transformation. Here, I should say that discussion has to start with the biannual review report results for every country, which show where countries are performing well or not performing well against each of the 7 commitments. That has to be the starting point to discuss why countries are not doing very well and identify policy areas that can be the basis for reforms for countries to invest and perform better. With that, thank you, William, and I'll be happy to respond to any other questions that may come from the audience. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. I think that is a very comprehensive summary. You have dealt with all the questions I raised and even gone further and dealt with some of the issues that were raised in the chat. I think I'm going to give the panelists an opportunity to ask questions of other panelists before we go to the questions in the chat. I know we have just got a few more minutes to go, but if any of the panelists from the first session or the second would like to ask a question of the fellow panelists, please just raise your hand or unmute and go ahead.
Yes, if I can go first, William. My question is to Roger from the Gates Foundation. First of all, we appreciate the support that we receive from the Gates Foundation in advancing our CAADP agenda, in particular around the CAADP annual review report. But I wanted to ask you, in looking at the outcomes of the Food System Summit, looking at the Africa Common Position and the various elements that are there, including the outcomes that will come from Thursday's summit, what is the foundation thinking about in terms of the future, the next 5-10 years towards 2030, in aligning your investments to Africa's agenda CAADP and now additionally Africa's common position?
Godfrey, thanks for the question. So I guess I would say three things. One is that the Gates Foundation position is really driven by what countries and what the AU and what African farmers put out as their priorities. So one of the things we heard really clearly over the last couple of years, and including from your office, is investment in the National Agriculture Research Centers. And how does the NARS really start to drive what are the right kinds of seed improvement, disease protection that African countries and African farmers want? And so we invested both with local NARS, but also through the CGIAR Excellence in Breeding Program to make sure that we could lower the time and improve the quality and the capacity of local breeding programs. And that's where I hope that will continue to yield benefit year after year, because you've actually increased the core capacity, right? I think a second thing is around the CAADP framework and around the commitments that the AU has made. We're going to try and walk alongside countries and say, what are your priorities? So one example we've had from Ethiopia was improvement in staple crops. Another one we've had in our discussions in West Africa is about disease resistance and for brown streak disease and mosaic virus on cassava. And we've just seen Kenya, Nigeria, and others make real progress on that. And so our research is really going to be invested in where countries tell us they have the biggest issues. Fall armyworm, for example, which Godfrey, you know well, the challenges of that. And then the last one is, I think, coming out of the AGRF and about AGRA, how do we get the right extension programs in place? How do we get the right agronomy in place? And then how do we do that in a way that works for Africa? And I think that our commitment of PIATA partners is all driven by what are the leaders coming out of the AU and out of AGRF tell us they want. And so our agenda is really driven by that, if that's helpful. And we've loved working with you as a partner. And I got to tell everyone on the panel, like, there have been times where you've asked us to do something different. You're like, no, we want you to do this over here. And that, as Jim said earlier, is where donors need to hear and respond to it. So thanks, Godfrey, for the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both Godfrey for the question and Roger for that very comprehensive answer. I'm going to give, sorry.
I have a quick question, William.
Go ahead, Jemima.
Jim and to Roger as well. And I know I asked this question again at the Global Donor Platform meeting, and because we have Evangelista here with us, and I'm sure a lot of other young people that are listening in. So we know there's a lot of funding going to governments. There's funding going to us as the CGIAR. How do we get more funding in the hands of young people who are really doing some innovative work that could get us to where we need to get to in terms of innovations, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of really making agriculture and food systems work? And I know I worked for a donor organization for 7 years. Our processes are complex. They are cumbersome. They are not always very friendly to young people, to groups of farmers, to farmers associations. How do we do this better?
Thank you, Jemima. Before we allow Jim and Roger to respond, I'd also like to give an opportunity to Evangelista, just in case you have a final comment or you also have a question to any of the other panelists. Go ahead and give it now, then I'll turn it over for the responses.
Okay, thank you very much, William. So Jemima has actually said everything that I wanted to ask in terms of funding for startups like me, for young people, because you notice that we have a lot to do, and the process of getting the funds is quite cumbersome. So I'll just let the other panelists answer Jemima's question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I think I'll go to you first, Jim, and then to Roger.
All right, so I will be as brief as I can. So first of all, I'm envious of Roger because I think his system is simpler than mine. You know, in terms of everyone who's ever worked with USAID is usually thrilled when they first hear, oh, I get to work with USAID, and then they learn a little bit more and they go, oh my, look at all of these requirements. It is what it is. We're a very large organization. We are funded by the US taxpayer and we're held to account for that. So there are systems in place. But now, having said all of that, I can tell you that the most successful programs that I have seen, Jemima and Evangelista, are when missions in the field, USAID missions, are being led by people that are open to innovation and to risk, and trying to figure out how we can do programs in a way that, again, shift the decision making from the mission director or the aid mission to the individuals, to the organizations, the NGOs. And so in countries where I've worked, we've set up local funds that have been managed by civil society, private sector, government. There's ways to do it. It's complicated. I would also say with a number of the things that Evangelista asked for, she asked for mentoring programs, innovation hubs. Those are the sorts of things that can be done relatively quickly if you have the right kind of partners that can put the pieces in play. Grant funding directly to entrepreneurs is trickier, but it's not impossible, right? I think our preference on average usually is to go with allowing the financial system of the country to operate. So what we try to do is use donor funds to get banks to be more engaged in more risk, right? Whether that's through guarantees or other things that allow them to look at an Evangelista's poultry company and be willing to invest in it. So that's what we try to do. We try to spur private sector to get involved with the smallholder farmer, the small businesses around the region. I'm sorry, Roger, I took too long. I'll pass it to you.
No, Jim, that's great. Jemima, I will do my best for a really crisp answer, and Evangelista, I'll try that as well. I would say 3 things that we're going to try and do and have been doing. One is in our financial inclusion work, how do we build the right kinds of infrastructure that actually gets access to the financial system for low-income people and for entrepreneurs on the continent? And I think that's actually changing the underlying economics and doing really foundational things like the World Bank's MOSIP program of getting IDs for people. We know that women are left out because they are oftentimes don't have the same ID penetration as men do. So how do we actually get the right kinds of financial services, the right kinds of IDs into the hands of low-income folks? The second one is, and I think Evangelista, where I get most excited, is build systems that work for local entrepreneurs. So our dual purpose poultry work in both West Africa and East Africa is trying to build the underlying breeding program for dual purpose poultry that can reach out to poultry developers in that country, whether they're going to do the dual purpose or layers or breeders. And then through our grantees, like getting a grant from the Gates Foundation is complex, as Jemima said. It's not always friendly to the local context. But that's why we do a lot of sub-grants through people like AGRA, through others that we invest in to bring those services on. And one example is a subsidiary of AGRA is the AECF, which provides really zero-based or low-income, low-cost loans into entrepreneurs. And we want to partner in those things. So one is foundation infrastructure. Two is to get the right policies in place around systems work. And third is to actually do sub-grantees that go on to those who are really are the right places to build that economy.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger and Jim, for answering those questions so comprehensively. As always happens during these sessions, when the conversation is so engaging, we have run out of time. I know that we had at the peak over 300 people join. We have, nearly 100 questions. We are not going to be able to get to all of them, but I do hope that participants have been able to learn from the comments that have been made by our excellent panelists. My final task is just to thank the panelists for being a part of this, thank AGRA for organizing this, and then hand it over to my brother, Dr. Fadel Diame, to make his closing remarks. Thank you all for participating, and I wish you Godspeed in your work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother William. I think I would ask everybody to give him a round of applause for an amazing job in facilitating this discussion.
Thank you.
So, I'll be brief. I think as you remember, we started off this session trying to understand Africa's challenges and solution to the issue of food systems. And I think we got throughout the discussion some very important points that I don't have time to summarize. Just allow me to go through some of the keyword headlines. I think we heard very clearly the need for government leadership. Government had to show the way. I think that came very clearly. But in this journey, smallholder farmer and SME are the roots of the problem, and they are also the solution. Therefore, the need to focus and prioritize. Addressing the issue of farmer productivity is the central question. We will need appropriate technical, institutional, and policy reforms that are very important. Government role is important, but it's not all about government. We will need to hear from private sector in terms of policy, but also implementation. As we engage with this, we know that climate change is going to be a big deterrent. Therefore, the need to focus on resilience and adaptation. Last but not least, we have heard voices of youth and women today, and hearing and acting on those voices is the single most important thing that we can do moving out of this meeting. And finally, I can say on behalf of all my colleagues that after the UN Food System Summit, after the COP, AGRA and the AGRF platform partners are committed to being the space where we'll continue to listen to this voice and create the issue-based coalition that enables us to walk the talk. With that, I would thank you all for your great contribution and wish you a very, very happy Food System Summit week. Thank you, William and colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.